Major funding for Frontline is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Chubb Group of Insurance Companies, for over 100 years providing worldwide business and personal insurance through independent agents and brokers.
Tonight, on Frontline, a story about Washington. But it is not about this Washington, the one that governs. It's about the one that burned. Not the city of the power brokers, but the city of the poorest of the poor. Tonight, a look at that other Washington and the people who run it in the shadow of the Capitol.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline with Jessica Savage.
23 years ago tomorrow, a North Carolina sit-in launched the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. 6 years earlier, the Supreme Court had called for an end to segregation in schools with all deliberate speed, sending the signal that an end to segregation and discrimination was at hand. But those in power moved slowly. SNCC and other civil rights groups helped change that. They not only challenged the power structure, they entered it. Today, those SNCC organizers run the District of Columbia. This is their story. The director of this report is Hector Galan. The reporter, Charlie Cobb.
This is Washington, D.C. It is the Washington familiar to all of us. My name is Charlie Cobb. I'm a reporter. There is another Washington. Tonight, I want you to meet some special people, the black men and women who came from these streets to govern the city. Their extraordinary history tells us something about how government works and whether it can work to meet the needs of poor people, especially the very poor.
Care about people. Care about people who in the dawn of life, who are youngsters, people in the twilight of life who are our seniors, and people in the shadow of life who are the poor, the handicapped, and all of those who need help that the Republicans have forgotten about. So Democrats do care, don't they? Yeah!
I would not have expected the Marion Barry I remembered to be surrounded by applauding powers of the National Democratic Party. 20 years ago, Mayor Marion Barry belonged to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a militant, student-led civil rights organization. Ivanhoe Donaldson, now Marion Barry's chief political advisor, was a SNCC organizer in Mississippi. City Councilman John Wilson, who chairs the Finance Committee, also worked for SNCC in Virginia and Mississippi. Throughout the city bureaucracy, there are former SNCC people like Cortland Cox, who organized in Alabama. And myself, I was a SNCC organizer in Mississippi. We were all forged in the furious fires that burned in the Deep South, cotton country, during the civil rights struggle.
SNCC was really an organization of organizers. It burst from Southern black college campuses exactly 23 years ago. February 1st, 1960.
We were young, teenagers, many of us. Segregation and discrimination were the law and the tradition. We were ready to challenge it.
I'm sorry, our management does not allow us to serve niggers in here.
Marion Barry was one of the leaders of the Nashville student movement. The prospect of violence surrounded us at lunch counters. In southern streets, we faced a society enraged at our direct challenge. We discovered that government itself would attack us. We challenged not only segregation, but much of the old ways of thinking about ourselves. Marion Barry became SNCC's first chairman. Ivanhoe Donaldson, Cortland Cox, John Wilson, and myself, as well as many others who joined SNCC, committed ourselves to what seemed the center of our generation's struggle for meaningful social change. Eventually, Marion came to Washington to open an office to support SNCC's work in the South.
Police is the #1 problem in America. And if you all don't want to deal with that, that's your
He quickly
problem.
found himself organizing on the streets. Police brutality and the issue of voter rights sometimes made the district feel like Mississippi.
We can conduct our own meeting in the 3rd district. And I live in the 3rd district. I live in the 3rd district. See, you dig it? I work in the 3rd district, dig it? And I deserve, the people out there live there deserve the right to be here, and they're going to come in here as long as I'm in here.
But the winds of change were blowing through the city. If the system here was a little less resistant to change, it was also a little threatened by the anger in the streets. By the late 1960s, some things had changed, including Marion Barry, who was now trying to join the establishment he'd been fighting.
Those of us who are in the movement have now decided we're going to try to come inside of the institutional form of government, called government, and try to make some difference there.
In 1968, Marion was elected to the school board. By 1974, he was elected to the newly established city council. And in 1978, he made a bid for mayor.
I have always will and have been my own man.
In that election, many voters were leery of his earlier radical, rabble-rousing image. An ad was designed to turn that image to his advantage. The message, you might not like everything Marion Barry says, but you know where he stands.
Marion Barry cares. He's working to get jobs for the people of our city. Where is Sterling Tucker? Where is Walter Washington? Take a stand. Vote Marion Barry for mayor.
We've come a long ways, haven't we?
He won, demonstrating a somewhat surprising ability to capture the votes of Kennedy Johnson white liberals who had come to Washington to run the programs of the Great Society. This, plus the support of many blacks who remembered his work in the streets, put him over the top.
It was like a dream when that guy got elected. No one thought he was going to win that election. Everyone was saying, yeah, you know, Marion's the best guy, and gosh, if I had my druthers, I'd vote for Marion, but he can't win. And then the paper goes and endorses him. Suddenly he gains some momentum. One of the candidates starts to drop. The front runner starts to lose speed on him. And suddenly he's elected. And you think, here it is, Camelot revisited on the local level. We're going to do it.
Hi, this is the mayor, Abigail.
Can I have a kiss?
A rabble-rousing street image wasn't a problem when he decided to run again in 1982.
Mayor Barry, he saw what unemployment was doing to people and had the vision to do something about it.
When you're so supportive...
This time, the campaign machinery was well-oiled. Marion had more than $1 million in his campaign kitty. His political ads were very different from those in 1978.
The fact is, Mayor Barry has increased locally funded jobs from 0 to over 7,000. When you cut through the promises, one record speaks for itself. Mayor Barry, he's more than just talk.
He won big with over 50% of the vote and has clearly emerged as the dominant political power in Washington, D.C. Now what would he do to fulfill the promises he'd made to himself and to the people of the city?
83. They funded when? 83. They made us whole. 83 win program. So we'll see. And we got to try to get our budgets through this session before this session adjourns. I talked to Julian about that.
Behind the scenes as chief political advisor, Ivanhoe Donaldson has played a crucial role in Marion Barry's political evolution. A number of black elected officials around the country have been assisted by Ivanhoe. For example, Georgia State Legislator Julian Bond and Andrew Young, Mayor of Atlanta.
My name is Ivanhoe Donaldson. I'm 21 years old. I'm a field secretary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, commonly known as SNCC.
I find it impossible to think of SNCC without thinking of Ivanhoe, the organizer's organizer. He can tell you and make you feel what organizing was like 20 years ago.
Some of you have gone through some of these workshops before. There's certain little things that you should always remember. Like you shouldn't be wearing a watch. Even if you trip, you're liable to break, especially if it's valuable to you. Girls who wear pierced earrings shouldn't be wearing them that day or today. But this young man really isn't protected at all because his hands ought to be over his head. He should be protected. He's doing a good thing. Notice, he went down here to protect. I hope all of you realize why we're going down there today. The kids who died, I've heard it, they're our age. The youngest was 13? 11. 11 years old. A girl. 4 girls and 2 boys. So they could pick a dynamite right through this window here in this church. I sure hope, people around the world will respond to it so we don't die for nothing.
When we gonna get together? Oh yeah, you got all the answers for all the problems? What about, Thursday around 10 o'clock?
As one of the city's 3 deputy mayors, Ivanhoe is still a whirlwind of energy. Both Ivanhoe and Marion have come a great distance since the days with SNCC in the Deep South 20 years ago. But even then, on those southern roads, we wondered how much of a difference we were really making. And that question still exists now, today, in Washington, D.C. Necessarily, questions of budget and bureaucracy occupied much of the time and thought of anyone administering a city. The people on the streets can become distant. But wouldn't the government of Marion Barry bring some special touch or sensitivity to helping the poor and homeless?
Let me say that I'm the same mayor who balanced the budget in 1981, who balanced the budget in 1982, who took us out of financial chaos and confusion to soundness and sanity.
What about user fees, sir?
Juan Williams covers the city government for the Washington Post.
It's in the dawning of politics here. I mean, and you have guys like Marion Barry who can get elected. People who should theoretically care. People who should theoretically be responsive to the mass of people. But God, you have to have doubts at this point.
We love the District of Columbia, don't we? We love the District of Columbia, don't we? We love the District of Columbia, don't we?
The District of Columbia's 45 square miles is easily found on the map. But D.C. is really many cities. Much of the city is middle class. West of the park, as we say, Rock Creek Park that divides the city north to south is largely white and wealthy. Across the river, as we also say, meaning southeast Washington, has a high density of the black and poor. Everywhere, the faces of poverty, so easy to spot, tear at the soul of the city. Mitch Snyder is one of those who works among them.
There's 2 cities. I mean, there's the city that both the tourists and the normal, everyday government workers see, and those are, the areas that are kept clean, where there's lots of plants and lots of grass and lots of trees and lots of impressive buildings. And there's the city that's made up of poor people and old people who are struggling to get through the day, and families who are struggling to get through the week and the month, and women who are fighting rats off their kids, and folks who are wondering where their next meal or their next job or their next ray of hope is going to come from. And the 2 cities exist side by side, but never really quite touch one another, The The tourists never just kind of slip into one by accident, or the government workers never quite just kind of slide into the other city by accident. The two have existed side by side for a very long time, and if the folks who have the power and the control in this city have anything to say about it, they're going to continue to exist side by side, and they're going to keep that narrow path between the two real clear and real open.
Growing poverty, growing desperation, growing crime. Crime is a word that makes sparks fly in this town. Robbery or sudden violence can happen in the best and worst of neighborhoods. It's never far from the mind of Ben Martin when he walks through the city in the early morning hours. He has lived here in LaDroit Park for over 50 years and watched his neighborhood and the city become more dangerous.
Every morning I get up between 4:30 and 4:45, and I go from here, right around Logan Circle, straight down to McPherson Square. It's nothing the same today as it was when I came here years ago. The people is different. The same people is not here anymore. They moved out and this new bunch move in from everywhere. I know the time when the police used to come right there on that corner, take his gun. We had a club over there in 210 in the back. He'd take his gun off and hang it up on the wall. He'd play cards, he drank whiskey, he came out there and he rung that box every hour on the hour. And he never made an arrest. There wasn't any arrest to make. People just didn't rob each other. People didn't hurt each other.
For over 17 years, Ben Martin has taken this same early morning walk. The pigeons wait patiently for him. The tourists wander in a separate universe. When he returns home, he returns to a world where safety and survival are uncertain.
Old people, cripples, and drunks, they prey on them people. Well, I got two of the main features, old and crippled. But I got two registered guns, shotgun and a rifle. They're all registered.
You're saying you have to have a gun to survive?
You got to. And if anybody think anything different, they're crazy. They find all these poor old people around beat up and stab and everything every day. Why are you thinking? Because the old and can't help themselves. And it's not going to change. Believe me, it's not going to change.
The problems of poverty and urban blight here in Washington confront every city. But if solutions are possible, I like to think that the SNCC veterans have the best chance of finding them. I asked Ivanhoe about how being in government has changed him.
You know, the SNCC people in the government haven't switched roles. Many of them are still doing what they've always done, except they got a new form to do it in, and the taxpayers pay for it, you know, which is organizing for things that they think are important. Marion Barry, however, has really become the leader.
When you're mayor, you have to be conscious of the fact that there are certain legal responsibilities of the office of mayor. There are things I have to sign, and things can't happen without my concurrence. But also you have to be mindful of the various and diverse constituencies. Washington is a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multicultural, multi-religious city, like most of our cities are. Just the numbers change in proportion.
Governments can reform themselves and they can become progressive and liberal. You know, whether governments can be radical and become institutions of change in of themselves, I don't think so, because the role of government is very status quo. And you try and say, well, can I use this institution to leverage, to help people? I think the answer is yes. Can I use this institution to make a radical change in the economy of the District of Columbia? No, you can get more people to participate. You can broaden it. You can get minorities involved in it, Hispanics and blacks. You know, you get women involved in it. But, you know, can you socialize this community through the government process? Probably not, I would say. No, no way. I mean, that becomes revolutionary. And you know, a government is vested to protect and defend what is.
I can get more done in 5 minutes with my signature on a document which says that 25% of all of our contracts, the D.C. government, contractors that D.C. government does business with will be minority. That's a process that's, in my view, in 1982, more effective than trying to assemble 1,000 black contractors, minority contractors outside the district building saying, why doesn't the government give us this opportunity to succeed? So I'm in position now, in my view, to make decisions to help a larger number of people with the least amount of effort.
Marion Barry has received his share of criticism from the pages of the Washington Post. Reporter Juan Williams has been tough on the city government.
There's one thing that always sticks in my mind from a conversation with him, and we were talking politics one day. This was when he was still talking to me. and I said, you know, there's a lot of complaints from people who say you've lost touch with the poor, that the guys now on Martin Luther King Avenue in Anacostia don't really feel like they know Marion Barry anymore, that you don't come around like you used to. You're not on the corner. You're not even there in terms of bringing the government's presence and the government's aid to those people. And he said, after a moment's hesitation, he said, you know, people in Ward 8 don't vote. And I thought to myself, well, I mean, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Do they vote or don't they vote? And in this town, those poor people, uneducated and especially unsophisticated in the ways of government, because we've just brought a local government to Washington, don't vote. So don't vote means don't count. And in Marion Barry's world, that's the calculation. You don't vote, you don't count. So, you know, what do I have to do for those people in Anacostia? Not much, says Marion Barry, because they don't vote.
I don't think that the error was to enter the system. I think the error was to let the system enter them.
As a city councilman, Reverend Douglas Moore was controversial and often challenged the Barry government. Doug was active in the 1960 meeting that created SNCC. Now he is attacking his former SNCC colleagues.
They look colored, but they're not. Not in the sense of being really concerned about the people who live in this city. Now, of course, you've heard me say before, we have a lot of colored clones.
Marion and other SNCC people disagree. They say they've chosen politics because it's the only game in town.
Right now, the Democratic Party is the game that people play in. If another game comes along, then that's fine. I don't think the organizers, Charlie, ought to ever define the game or create the institutions. I think the strength of an organizer is that irrespective of the ideology, it's in the background, it's hidden. Their agendas aren't visible. They allow people to create their own agendas. The organizer's belief is that if what they're doing is right, the agendas will merge at some point in history. You know, the difference between the ideologue and the organizers, the ideologue says, well, here's what you gotta believe. This is the truth. And if you don't believe this truth, you're not relevant. You don't understand. You're a cop-out. You're a sellout. You're a revisionist. You're this. They got 4,000 words that they call you. The organizer doesn't play that game. They just keep whittling away, molding in, advocating on the outside, and they build. Slowly and surely, throughout the pages of history, they build. But they build through people. You know, the organizer's not the leader. You know, they're not, I mean, Mayor Barry has switched roles here. You know, I haven't.
Nevertheless, ideals can be whittled away by a massive bureaucracy. Translating SNCC's ideals into government action is difficult, especially when it comes to meeting the needs of poor people.
You know, that's my problem. I've been trying to figure out for 8.5 years what I can do as a councilman that would basically have some effect on poor people. What we have, I guess in the last 8.5 years, I've compiled an absolutely good legislative record. I don't think anybody can dispute that. But I really believe as a legislature, as far as poor people are concerned, I've been absolutely ineffective.
What do you mean? Explain that some
more.
more.
Well, when I look at the conditions that most poor people are living in the city at this point, they were living under the same conditions when I came into office. And I was hoping that within 4 or 5 years, we could at least begin to turn the situation around. But maybe I was much too naive.
If government can't find the answers for poor people, are they doomed to remain forever trapped at the bottom of society?
We saw the other day here in Washington when the Klan came, a little outburst where some members of that underclass, mostly young men in their late teens and early 20s, just went off, started throwing bricks, started getting angry at the cops, really for no good reason, just a kind of angry outburst. But those people are living in hard times. There's strong unemployment among youth here. It's close to 70% among black youth in Washington, D.C. I don't know what happens to those people. They become your permanent underclass. They become the people who are disaffected, and that their numbers are growing here.
Washington streets have exploded before. In 1968, the trigger was the assassination of Martin Luther King. Deeply felt anger at society underlay that revolt. 14th Street never recovered from the fires of that time. The street looks calm, but it feels like a lit fuse. When 14th Street hummed with political and cultural activity, I lived next door to Washington poet Gaston Neal. For 2 days, the frenzied street seemed almost liberated, but it didn't last long.
All of a sudden, about on the third day, an almost eerie, weird silence dropped over. And way down the street, as you look down 14th Street, you saw, coming up from downtown, you saw these lights flashing and blinking. And it was, it was a scary feeling, because you sensed something different was happening from that, you know, wonderful sense of liberation. And all of a sudden, as they got closer and closer, you could see, like it was the 82nd Airborne, and you could see the half-track, and you could see the 50 caliber machine gun. You saw the whole weight of America beginning to descend upon us.
The dilemma facing Marion's government is that if solutions to today's problems aren't found, it could happen again.
If we have a continuance of ignoring the struggles of the people, all the little gains that from the 60s that are being snatched away, yes, definitely. I would want it to happen again. But I would want it to happen in a different sense. I mean, I would want it to, like, I want us, the people to come to the streets again and demand, you know, what is rightfully, you know, ours in the sense of our well-being, our education, our growth. We can't get it through addressing it in what we call the normal way. Then again, I'll go and join again. My own house was burnt down. And I'll say, burn my house down and burn, and all the precious things that I love was burned down. My letters from Langston Hughes, my paintings, you know, my books, my records, all that destroyed during the 68 rebellion. 14th Street was where the action was, you know, in terms of our, you know, the political growth, you know, of Washington. Yeah. Because out of this came, again, our city councilman, you know, our mayor, you know, the politics of 14th Street produced, you know, the politics of Washington, which is, to me, you know, is ultimately important, you know, the importance of the street. You know, it's with a pain that, you know, you walk up and down here now and you don't see, you don't feel.
Any of that.
No, it's all gone.
Gaston and I pushed into the old boarded-up SNCC office, and memories came flooding back.
It was, you know, a magnificent place. It was our beginning. And as you can see, it's torn down. It's nothing.
Across town in the northeast section, Billy Chen took me through the litter of his demolished dream. The 14th Street uprising helped loosen money for community services. Here, Billy and others organized a 24-hour center for teenagers. Now it's closed.
I know one thing, I'd never go through this again. It was too much emotion, too much attachment, and too precious when it fails. And it failed because it wasn't supported.
Most community organizations have been battered so much, they're tired. They are defeated. So we're in a period of retreat and reticence, that there is no strong voice in terms of there being any movement in the black community or in the white community. It just doesn't exist.
Local government is almost brand new in Washington. One result has been that many of the city's key community organizers have been absorbed into the system.
A lot of the leadership, you know, from the movement days did in fact get absorbed into the government. Plus you get this contradiction where, you know, we go into the government, you know, and people start attacking us. You say, well, wait a second, now I ain't responsible for that mess. You know, we're just, you know, we're the same old folks. People say, no, you're not, you're in charge.
The meaning of being in charge still occupies much of the discussion when SNCC people gather. This evening we're getting together. Some of us in government, some out. Some of us will have nothing to do with government. We are journalists, lawyers, in business, unemployed, in the arts, many things. None of us is without questions and strong opinion.
Is it worth what you gain as a councilman or as a mayor or as an advisor to the mayor or an organizer for the mayor, as a troubleshooter for the mayor? Is it worth what you gain in government in terms of what you lose, perhaps, by not expending all of those creative energies? Organizing neighborhoods independent of government. I mean, should you be an advocate or should you be a government official?
We've won that argument by winning this administration. Now we have to fight to make this administration consistent with what SNCC was. As inclusionary, as issue-oriented, and as open to people as possible. I don't know whether or not we're going to win that one. It depends on him.
I would really like to see something emanating out of the district building, out of the mayor's office, out of the city council by those people who subscribe to a particular dream that had, in fact, something to do with saving a good portion of this city for poor people and black people. And I don't really see that happening.
In a real sense, I wonder if we are over-expecting because of where we have come from and who we are. And if we are over-expecting, we are all in for a great disappointment.
But you keep talking about it.
I think that what's happening here is not, Tim, the question of the limits of government, because there are. I think that in each of our roles and what we do, there are limitations. It's what we do with the roles you know, that make things important. So we are empowering. We've brought credibility and resources to a lot of little things out there.
You're talking about hard decisions to make these days. They're not easy decisions. And they're decisions that we try to approach, I think, in some sort of passionate fashion.
You know, the government hasn't become everything. You now hold some positions in it, but what the hell? It was limited then, it's limited now. It's the people, it's still the people. It is still the people who have to understand what they want out of a government and what the rules are that they require government to live by. And that is the organizing job that's not related to parties and even holding elective office.
But in a real sense, people vote for people like Marion in great part because they think that he can not only translate his former commitment into power for them, but can make things change for them. And that is a very heavy burden, particularly in times like these.
I think part of what happens is you get stuck in Washington without getting out of it. You don't see what's not happening anywhere else. And so it's a relative situation, the way I look at it. What can you do with the constraints, with the mood of the country changing as it has? The whole mood is different in 1982 than it was in 1962. I mean, this is totally different.
Politics is only a means. And the question is, what do you have to do that can't be done by government in the lives of people? And are we prepared to do that still?
As long as we continue to participate in the process, and as long as we are wise enough to make sound decisions, sound political decisions that don't radically change the base, then what is basically going to happen is that we're going to be able to forge the change that everybody's talking about. We got to believe that. If you don't believe that, then I don't know how you get up every morning. I have to believe that. It's essential for me to believe that. In order to operate on a day-to-day basis, I must believe that.
We, I mean, of any and everybody in this country, have certain a commitment and potential. And I include myself in this because, you know, I get scared myself. But there's certain things that we're not doing. So I don't want to just talk about winning and how we won the campaign and blah-de-blah-de, when there are a lot of other things that we should really substantively deal with. How can we change them?
The discussion will continue, for no one can pretend that answers for today are any less complex than the problems. Howard University professor Ronald Walters.
We are now experiencing the first generation of people who went into the political system. And I think that we have developed some unusual expectations, some expectations that probably weren't realistic. For example, I mean, it was very heady stuff to wake up one morning and find that your mayor was black and your city council was black, or your school board was black, and that gave you the illusion of political power. And as a result of it, our politicians, I think, overpromised, and those individuals who followed them overexpected. I think now what we're seeing is that once we begin to put electoral politics and politicians in their proper perspective, we'll find that we really do have to return to building strong community organizations. We really do have to rely on the organizers, because these things don't really work unless you have these strong, active, vital organizations outside them.
Government doesn't really work.
Government doesn't work. The bureaucracy doesn't work in the interest of people unless you have people organized outside it. Now, that's what we're just beginning, I think, to understand.
There are signs that Ron's idea is gaining ground. While there aren't very many, some groups are trying to organize without the government. Early in the morning, the produce here is distributed to 5 states. Members of the Community for Creative Nonviolence come to collect what's thrown away. They try and beat the hog raisers. Sometimes they don't. Hundreds receive the food at churches such as this one, Calvary Methodist Church, just off 14th Street. Mitch Schneider believes that staying far from government is necessary.
We understand that we have a responsibility to meet the needs of our neighbors, but we understand equally well that we have probably a greater responsibility to address the sources, the roots of their pain and their misery, and quite often that's the policies and the programs and the priorities of the government. Good, energetic people should use their strength and their energy to stay as far away from government as they can, because it's a perverting kind of influence. I mean, we would not take money from the government if they delivered it in a brown paper bag in the middle of the night. I say that honestly. If we knew it came from the government, we'd give it back in the middle of the night in a brown paper bag. You can't become involved with something that is that's dead. You can't deal with a dead institution, with a twisted institution, and come out whole or come out alive. The government is a bureaucratic maze and mess. It has not the capacity, nor does it have the inclination to do what it is supposed to do, and I'm not even sure it can.
You don't see trash all over the lawns anymore.
Unlike Mitch, community organizer Kimmy Gray is on the city payroll. Even though she has misgivings about politicians, she works the government for all it's worth. Kimmy always talks about the ways poor people can control their own destiny. Most of her work takes place in public housing projects. Projects, she says, that like the one she lives in, should and can be managed by residents.
Hell, we still owe the people $196, 1,000 some odd dollars, and we just paid them half of it the other day. Nobody agrees with anybody. First, they be...
I think the most unique thing about our problem is we organize together. Everybody has input. Everybody's a part of the decision making. Everybody's ideas are as good as anyone else's.
No place is too tough or difficult for Kimmy's organizing efforts, and Valley Green Public Housing Project in Southeast Washington is one of the toughest.
A lot of times we allow so many negative things to take place in our communities, and we don't set our own standards of how we want to live. We allow other folks to do that.
Right,
okay?
right.
Do you think this community is organized enough to have a meeting and set standards and raise them and say, now, this is the way we're going to live in public housing, and it's not going to be any other way?
Yes.
And
yes.
anyone that can't live by these rules and regulations, then they're going out of here.
That's right. You're right
Okay,
about that.
then.
You
Miss
said.
Gimme.
Yes, ma'am.
Look at them saying. They have their picks around here.
They have picks around here.
They have their picks around here. Okay, them saying. We know them saying everybody's job is slack. Them saying they have their picks around here. Who can work and who ain't gonna work.
Okay, well, why aren't you on one of the committees to determine that?
What
and
committee?
if you don't like the leadership around here, why aren't you running to change it? See, some of us only come out when we want to receive, okay? Some of us come out to give, and that's the difference. Public housing, quote-unquote, so-called leaders, citywide representatives, what usually happens is that they are courted and co-opted by the mayor, by the public housing administrator. So what happens is that they're usually welfare recipients of very low education levels. So what they do is that they are offered nice jobs. They move out of the family properties to a newer complex or a home or something, scattered sites, and they're rewarded, they're told, for their good deeds they have done for the public housing residents. When in reality, they are being paid off. Now, once you get hired into the government and housing, you can't fight the enemy from inside. So once they get you on payroll and you sign your little 171 form and give it to them and they do the personal act, well, they got you. So there's no more out there saying, we want hot water, we want heat, we want better management, because then you're on their payroll.
This motel is a temporary shelter for 500 homeless people, mostly single women and their children. Despite the best intentions, neither Marion's government nor activists like Kimmy can help the thousands of other homeless in Washington. These people seem destined to remain imprisoned by their poverty.
It's a very depressing kind of a situation. I mean, we've got people who have been here since July and August, and a lot of our job is to try to keep people motivated and keep their spirits up and assist them basically in trying to find housing.
For a lot of people, it's going to be next to impossible for us to find housing for, and we realize that. It's never gotten to the point where we have the large numbers that we have now.
Every day I'm either looking or I'm calling. I'm trying to, since I've been in here, trying to find housing. But it's just very hard. The people here in the district do not care about the poor. They want the poor people in one section of town, and they want you to stay there. There's no such thing as finding housing in the Northwest area.
I see now that it's still going to be hard because they haven't found me any place yet. I haven't found any place, so I don't know what I'm going to do. Whether they're going to let me stay here or whether they're going to put me out, put me in another shelter. I don't know what they're going to do.
Well, we're still homeless. You see what I'm saying? You know, we have shelter and we have 3 meals a day, but it's not home. It's not an environment you want to raise your children in. It's not a place you want to live for months. You know, it's almost like a prison.
Both Ivanhoe and Cortland Cox acknowledge that in the system we have now, there will always be people trapped at the bottom.
If you're saying that we as a people are failing to meet the needs of our broad community base, you know, well, the answer is that, of course we are. You know, poverty is worse today than it was ever before. You know, the income gap between blacks and whites is broader.
If in a capitalist society, there's always going to be a group of people on the bottom, I mean, it's built on that. And that in many instances, the government will not do anything for them. Sometimes the government will do things to them, like put them in jail.
I think this government's struggle is to, with or without resources, say there are some minimum thresholds. The right to shelter, the mayor talks about all the time. The right to a job, the mayor talks about all the time. More so than any other mayor, I think, out in the streets where people are. And he's commanding his government to help him figure out a way how to do it.
I believe they want change, but part of what needs radical changing is the system they've entered. The troops for that are not likely to come from government. I went to John Wilson to see if he was feeling the heat of outside pressure.
Who's pushing you, John? Who's 18, 19, 20 years old when you were in the South, pushing you the same way you push, say, the NAACP?
That's what scares me. There's nobody, I don't think. Young people don't seem to be interested in this arena at all. I don't see, okay, when we were 17, 18 years old, we were really pushing the established community, the established blacks and established whites, truthfully. We were pushing them desperately, and they resented the push, too. But they also gave us a sense of reasoning and shared a lot of their wisdom with us, too. There are not that many young people at this point that I see are pushing anybody politically in this government. I wonder who's going to replace us sometimes.
I'm frightened that every single person in this story says that there is a growing class of people in our cities that government can do little to help. As we have become wealthier, they have become poorer. I'm saddened that this is now matter-of-factly accepted as natural. Government, we've been told, can do little, even an especially sensitive government like Mayor Barry's. So I keep asking myself why Marion, Ivanhoe, and all my friends are in government, and why they haven't been more effective in helping the people who are at the center of their concern. Part of the answer has to do with the nature of the governmental process. It's not designed for poor people. Part of the answer has to do with the way power changes people. Its seductions can narrow vision. It's probably too early to judge Mayor Barry and his administration, but one thing is obviously missing: pressure. 20 years ago, SNCC's challenge wasn't just to an oppressive white power structure. It was also to a black establishment we felt was too cautious. The pressure was essential. There are all too few younger versions of Marion and Ivanhoe. In the communities of the poor, I don't see the strong men coming on, getting stronger, pushing and testing and organizing. Without them, even the best of intentions won't change a thing.
The problems raised in this report confront every major American city, and they also apply to a whole generation from the 50s and 60s who face the conflict of dreams and ideals up against the realities of politics. Can government alone deal with the problems of poverty? That question is of special concern to blacks in this country. So I brought together Benjamin Hooks, executive director of the NAACP, Eugene Rivers, who's at Harvard but works in Boston's black communities, and Charlie Cobb. We screened the film for them, and it sparked a debate started by Eugene Rivers, who questions the role of what he calls the black elite.
And so what I'm saying is that at this stage of the game, it's not simply black versus white. There's the additional factor of conflicting material interests within the black community, so that at certain points, the interests of the black underclass may be in diametric opposition to the interests of a Gibson in Newark, or a Coleman Young in Detroit, or a Marion Barry in D.C. So we have different classes with different agendas and different interests intersecting with more clarity than we've perhaps had before in history.
Are you saying that it does not make a difference to have gone through all the period of time that SNCC organized and that the NAACP organized, and that we have this point now where there are blacks that can do television programs, blacks that can hold office? What difference does that make to the poor black citizens? Are you saying it makes no...
I'm saying that that's a kind of cathartic symbolism which does not translate into putting food on the table or providing jobs. And I'd say something else. On one level, it fosters the illusion that there is a degree of opportunity which simply does not exist when you look at the numbers. We've got over 2,000 black elected officials, and in Newark, where you have a large black population, or Detroit, they can't deliver the goods. Bottom line. We have got to get black people mobilized in communities.
Cleveland has a white mayor, Cincinnati has a white mayor, and they have joblessness. Why don't you say, then white people got to begin to organize?
My concern is black people.
If you look at it and analogize it, the fact is there are 12 million unemployed people in America today, according to the records. And the white people occupy most of the political jobs. If politics alone could solve joblessness, then there would be no white people unemployed, and that is not true. There is a limit to what political power can accomplish.
What seems to be evolving here is that I seem to understand you to be saying that those blacks who have made it, in the sense of white America, made it into politics, made it into the media, made it into whatever, those people don't reach back enough and help the poor blacks in the community. There is a black elite. Is that correct?
That's generally true. We could use the example of Harvard University, where you have a sizable black population. If black students at Harvard took the rhetoric about being opposed to racism and injustice and inequality and translated that logically, they would spend less of their time engaging in a lot of frivolous social activity and working in the black community. But that doesn't happen.
Why?
Because they're not really interested in doing that. Their interest is this: to penetrate the private sector, get into corporations, and say that black people benefit vicariously because I'm living up in a sweet penthouse, living good, having mine.
I would have to agree with Eugene that not enough black people who have made it have manifested an interest in the cause. I have no problem saying that.
You kind of talked about that in terms of NAACP.
In other words, NAACP, an organization that is the largest that we have, only has 400,000 members out of 30 million black people. It seems to me we should have more members. If we don't have more members, then they ought to join Eugene or somebody, Jesse, or it doesn't. In other words, we ought to be somewhere. We ought not be on the sidelines. I agree with that.
In summation, what type of advice would you give to Mr. Hooks?
If I couldn't get the NAACP to focus on the issues that they should be focusing on to foster authentic economic democracy in the United States, to struggle for that, I'd resign.
Mr. Hooks.
Using your influence to get your friends and neighbors to vote intelligently, to be articulate, to belong to some kind of organization, whatever it is, in an organized way that's trying to affect change in this country.
And Charlie, you would say what?
It's the question of crime, drugs, and physical security.
All right.
That is the thing I see, at least in urban areas, that is most corrosive to life.
You're absolutely right.
Now, that's what I'd be organizing against. I would be attempting to build within the black community, or in fact any other community, an independent political institution that could begin to articulate the varied demands and concerns of people, both in relationship to existing political institutions and existing economic institutions.
That conversation went on long after we stopped taping. You know, 23 years ago, it was perhaps easier to identify the problems. It was basically black versus white, massive, fought out in the streets. Now it cuts across racial lines. Through mass communication, we talk it out in our own living rooms. Then the pressure was on the establishment to change laws. Now the pressure is on all of us to make those laws work to all our good. Next week, as Secretary of State George Shultz returns from China, Frontline travels to the other China, Taiwan. It's been called the ticking time bomb for U.S.-China relations. We've patrolled its waters, armed it, and made it a major foreign policy concern for Americans. But what's the Chinese perspective? We call the program A Chinese Affair. It is next week on Frontline. I'm Jessica Savage.
For a transcript of this program, please send $4 to Frontline, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding for Frontline was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Chubb Group of insurance companies, for over 100 years providing worldwide business and personal insurance through independent agents and brokers.